All right, my ELA friends, Christian Kuhn coming at you again for another writing workshop video, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. So I want to present to you a few videos in the coming weeks whereby I'm going to soapbox very hard at the beginning of the next academic year. So at the time of recording, we're just at the cusp of June. I'm in New York State and we go until the end of June. We have our Regents exams and then we're done. And I'm already put the lid on this year and I'm thinking about next year. And the bane of my existence is probably the same bane as yours. There's three things I want to address in September when I inherit my new group of kids. One is engagement. So I'm going to make a video called self-exploration of motivation, and basically it's going to have an essential question that goes like this: to what extent do your current levels of motivation align with your future goals? I really think oftentimes that students lack the foresight to accurately and honestly answer that question. So I want to deal with the engagement gap immediately. And then the second thing that I want to talk about is the role of artificial intelligence in education. I've already made that video. Go in my channel and look at it. It's a synthesis essay, and I want to address cheating right out of the gate. The idea that kids are using ChatGPT to write their essays. Here's the kicker with that: if you're using my templates, you will catch kids cheating every single time. So that's a fascinating writing workshop video. Check that out. And then in this one, we are going to do one of my Change My Mind series from Stephen Blake Crowder. And his signage reads, "Holy moly, ban cell phones in schools already." So that's what we're going to focus on in this particular writing workshop, is a synthesis essay where I'm going to make the provocative statement of, hey, I think we need to ban these darn cell phones already. And students can argue with me, against me, or qualify it. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So there are requisite parts to synthesis. And what I'm going to do in this particular writing workshop video is highlight my Lego Man template yet again. And we know that in synthesis, students have to use a variety of sources. They have to embed their quotes. They have to accurately articulate their thesis statement up top. There's all sorts of rules and guidelines and parameters to synthesis. And what I learned was there are 9 blocks to construct a Lego man, and there are 9 integral moves that students must make within a composition in order to construct a nice, cogent, coherent synthesis argument. So as we do those 9 things, students are going to be awarded a Lego brick so that they can construct a Lego man as we go along. And as I've said in my other videos where I featured my Lego man template, you can use physical Legos if you want, if you have them lying around, or you can use a box of crayons or some chalk or markers or anything of that nature. So it doesn't necessarily matter how you do it. So without further ado, let's jump into the prompt, and I'll talk about some of the sources and how we cobble this essay together from start to finish. So here's the prompt. Stephen Blake Crowder is at it again. He's in your school's bus loop, proudly sitting at his booth with the following signage: "Holy moly, ban cell phones in schools already." Read the following sources and accompanying material, accompanying contextual information carefully. Write a formal letter to Crowder. So write a formal letter to Crowder that synthesizes material from at least 3 sources and develops your position on the use of cell phones in your school. So kind of a la College Board FRQ1 for the AP language exam. I'm going to use this with on-level juniors and my AP Lang students because cell phones are a ubiquitous, pervasive problem across the board. So I'm going to show you the different various gradations I would do for this particular essay for on-level students and, give it a higher dimension at the AP level. So before I jump into my templates, I want to say this. You got to Bob Ross your instruction. And here's what I mean by that. There's a seismic difference between the assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of it. When I work with teachers through the National Writing Project, or when I'm just consulting with teachers, when I push into districts, I always tell teachers, position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom. Write with your students, paint with your students. And here's the kicker with Bob Ross. We know in The Joy of Painting, he always stood at the canvas and easel, and he guided us through every single painting. But the kicker with Bob Ross is that he used a heuristic called the wet on wet technique. In composition, we often call heuristics templates. And for mine, we know that we can declare or invert the thesis, and then all body paragraphs we can do syllogistically. So in order for students to comprehend that, you just can't talk into the ether, pie and sky about templates and theory and technique. You got to get to that proverbial canvas and easel and show them how to do it. So I have a slew of exemplars and models in this writing workshop that could probably help demystify things for your students. But I always think it's a good practice for teachers to write with their students. Show them your confusion, show them your struggle, and show them the ease at which you can do it too. So without further ado, we're staring at our blank sheet of paper, our blank screen. We've read all the sources. We fishbowled Socratic Seminard, Harkness discussion, the whole kit and caboodle. And we ask ourselves this question. So, how do I construct the introductory paragraph? And for those that are familiar with my work, I have a tacit response to that. You can either declare or invert. So let's go in order here and talk about the declarative thesis. So we have that essential question, right? Holy moly, ban cell phones in schools already. To ban or not to ban or to qualify it. So students can just right out of the gate, boom, address their letter to Steven Crowder and drop the thesis, right? No thrills, no chills, no, tap dancing around the issue, just boom, drop the thesis. So that's what we mean when we declare. You declare the thesis quite literally. So you want to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background, but here's what that does not mean. Do not quote any of the sources. Do not paraphrase any of the sources. Do not mention any of the sources. The College Board is very clear, and I know some of you are going to do this on level and not in an AP language setting, but still this is a good rule. The student's argument should stay central. So the moment they begin to piggyback somebody else in the introductory paragraph, they've lost the centrality of their argument. So I don't want any of that in there. Now, there's two other things that I like to see in the introduction. The first is tier 2 level vocabulary, and the second are sentence constructs. Let me speak about tier 2 level vocabulary. All I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. And I run intensive word study academies throughout my academic year because, I don't know, I'm 21 years into my career, and I just think that each year exponentially, the vocabulary void grows exponentially. And I have to step up my game and help fill that void. So I do hundreds of activities in my word study academy to help augment my students' vocab. And you should see that in their writing in the samples that you're going to see in just a second. Students got to cop a certain academic tone. It's a formal letter to Crowder, and Crowder's a jokester, but nonetheless, we can add a little bit of colloquial vernacular to joust with them, but it's an academic paper, so we're going to need to cop some higher level vocab without overdoing it. The second thing are sentence constructs. I strongly endorse a manual called Write It Right by Strunk and White. It's a seminal text, and it's a staple in my classroom. And in Write It Right, Strunk and White reference something that is known as rule number 18. And rule number 18 posits that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So as students are working towards sophistication, I call that voice rhythm flow. As they're trying to achieve that, struggling and emerging writers often overuse independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences so that you get this da-dot, 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 da-dot kind of rhythm, that droning rhythm. They have to be able to manipulate all 12 sentence constructs to get voice, rhythm, and flow. Know the purpose of a sentence, right? Know the purpose of syntactical maneuvers. And that's how you get sophistication, voice, rhythm, and flow. I think that's one integral part of it. So you'll see my students manipulating a variety of sentence constructs for the purpose of achieving that higher level of sophistication. And then the kicker, all of my introductions, regardless of expository mode, are 4 sentences long. So rhetorical analysis, synthesis, persuasion, argument, literary analysis, research, 4 sentences long. That's all you need. So let's flip this over on its head and do the inverted. So you can see here the triangle literally gets flipped if you want to look at it graphically. So in this case, you end with the thesis. You might begin with a hook analogy, the context, the background. And that 4th sentence is going to answer the essential question. So you sprinkle in the context and background, use a little bit of tier 2, focus on those sentence constructs, and it's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. All right. Let's construct some Lego men here, and let's construct some inverted and declarative theses. Let's build this together. So student number 1 steps to the plate, and they're like, all right, man, Mr. Kuhn wants me to bust out a declarative or an inverted. So I know that I can either start with the thesis, end with the thesis. I got to focus on my tier 2, my sentence constructs, and I can only rock and roll 4 sentences. I'm writing a letter to Steven Crowder. So here it is. Dear Mr. Crowder, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is perhaps one of your more moronic brain children. In fact, you sound like all the other boomers who are chronically bemoaning the ills of my generation. What you fail to see is that most of the extant and credible research points to a certain truth. Cell phones and other technologies actually augment learning. As such, cell phones need to be embraced as a phenomenally transformative tool, as they certainly are. All right, that sounds pretty cool, but let's break this down and construct a Lego man out of it and look at the 4 integral components that are essential to an introductory paragraph. So this is what I do in terms of constructing the Lego man. If the student answers the essential question, they get awarded the head, the skull, because that's the hub, that's the mechanism of the whole essay, is that thesis statement. If they provide the context and background, which are basically the eyes of the line of reasoning, it establishes the line of reasoning, they get the brows and the eyes. I looked for a minimum of 2 tier 2 level words. It's kind of arbitrary, but I thought 2 was a decent reach for some of my students. They get awarded the mouth. And then the hair is the variety of sentence structures. And if they crush the grammar, punctuation, and syntax, they can accessorize. So let's break this down bit by bit. Let's start with the thesis statement. This is a quintessential inverted thesis. So the last sentence is the thesis statement. And look how the student addresses the essential question. As such, cell phones need to be embraced as a phenomenally transformative tool, as they certainly are. So that's a clear thesis. Again, it comes in the last sentence, so it's an inverted thesis. And I like the language. It's strong, it's assertive. It sounds like this student is dropping the hammer in the argument against Stephen Blake Crowder, right? Going head to head, toe to toe, mano a mano with Stephen Crowder. I love the emphatic nature of it. So the first 3 sentences should be context and background, and the student will be awarded the eyes and the brows if they do this correct. And again, I want to emphasize this. No mention of the sources whatsoever in the context and background. So let's see what context and background looks like. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is perhaps one of your more moronic brain children. So you can see the student showing his cards here. We know which direction he's going, but that's not the articulation of the thesis yet. In fact, you sound like all the other boomers who are chronically bemoaning the ills of my generation. What you fail to see is that most of the extant and credible research points to a certain truth. Cell phones and other technologies actually augment learning. All right, so that's definitely context and background. That awards them the eyes and the eyebrows. Let's go to the mouth. Tier 2 level vocabulary is full of great words. I love the use of moronic, chronically bemoaning, extant, augment, and that's just to name a few of them in there. So there were other tier 2 level words, but you can see here that I really don't want students to, entertain the notion that if they use $1 million words, that's the equivalent of doing good writing. This student possesses control of all of those words. It sounds natural, but it sounds academic. It sounds intelligent. This kid is at his academic best and flexing all over Stephen Blake Crowder, which I like. Great words, right? I love the word moronic. I thought that was really, really nice. So in terms of rule number 18, let's look at the punctuation here. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, comma, this is perhaps one of your more moronic brain children. So you got a middle comma there. What I tell my students is this: don't parallel your syntax. Since you went middle comma there, in the next sentence, don't go middle comma. In fact, comma, you sound like all the other boomers who are chronically bemoaning the ills of my generation. So just an early comma, so that's flowing. So don't do that again. What you fail to see is that most of the extant and credible research points to a certain truth. Colon. Again, how often do you see students using colons in essays, right? I've read for the College Board, and sometimes I go 1,000 essays and don't see a semicolon, a colon, or a dash. So this is part of my Nuance Academy. My students master grammar, punctuation, syntax, because that's part of sophistication in the voice, rhythm, and flow. You have to have mastery of that stuff. Cell phones, and then you have a parenthetical, and other technologies actually augment learning. As such, comma, cell phones need to be embraced as a phenomenally transformative tool, comma, as they certainly are. So lots of great syntactical flair there. This kid has great control of the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax. So I would allow them the accessorization point all day long, and they're good to go, and let me touch upon this even further here, in terms of accessorizing. The grammar, the punctuation, the syntax is integral, and especially at the AP level, students need to master this stuff. So I do something called the Nuance Academy, and for all of my academies, my students graduate from them. They get certificates throughout the course of the year. I have a test. It's 50 mentor sentences full of grammatical mistakes, devoid of punctuation, full of syntactical errors. So 50 mentor sentences that students need to fix perfectly. And in order to get the certificate, they need to score 90 or higher. And they retest until they graduate with a 90. I want mastery on this. And I do that even for my on-level students. And sometimes it takes students 6 or 7 tries to pass it. But I'm just a big stickler. Kids need to know the basics and the fundamentals as far as composition goes. All right, so that's one introduction. Let's do that all over again and have student number 2 step to the plate. So again, we're writing a letter, so you got to address it. Start with the thesis or end with the thesis. Context, background, sentence constructs, tier 2. Stephen, as it stands, let me be the first to hop on your bandwagon to put the kibosh on cell phones once and for all in my district. Not only are they the leading deterrent to learning, which is the main reason why one attends school in the first place, but their mere existence has led to the general stupefaction of my generation. The bottom line is this: as long as cell phones stay present in the classroom, kids can't learn and teachers can't teach. Given this fact, I'm 100% on board with you. All right, so that sounds really good as well. Again, you can see here 4 sentences is plenty to house this, and it's plenty of space to clearly articulate the thesis and give a little bit of foundation for the argument. So let's break this down. You have a thesis in that first sentence, so they declared, so we can award the head. They have the 3 sentences of context and background, so you can award the eyes. In terms of tier 2, I like the vocab on this. And again, I was telling my students that you can use a little bit of colloquial and vernacular, because Stephen Blake Crowder is so flip in his approach to this, right? You can, when you're bantering back with him, it's okay to use a little tad bit of colloquial and vernacular. Don't overdo it. I want them to lean more towards the academic. So words like kibosh are really cool. Deterrent, mere existence, stupefaction, right? Really good words that are quite nice. In terms of the sentence constructs, very cool stuff going on here. The kid's got a parenthetical statement. They used a dash. There are some short, simple, independent clauses when they're hammering their point. All very good. And then the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax is 100% perfect. So this kid can accessorize as well. So you can see here, lead with the thesis or end with the thesis, declare or invert, 3 sentences, context, background, keep the vocab up without overdoing it. Don't parallel your syntax, right? Have a variety of syntactical moves. So yes, you can, right? This might look difficult for some students. They might say, oh my goodness, Christian students are such good writers. You can do this. Practice, practice, practice. Hopefully your teacher gets to the canvas and easel and paints with you so that it's nicely demystified. But yes, you can do this. So let's have student number 3 step to the plate, and we'll break down the Lego head yet again. So again, you're writing a letter. You have to answer the essential question, first or last, context, background, tier 2 sentence constructs. So let's do number 3. Dear Mr. Crowder, let me be the first to politely disagree with you. While your generation was doing math with a Stone Age abacus, my era has all the right answers conveniently located in a smart device. All of our subjects, everything from STEM to the humanities and arts, is tightly packed in that marvel of technology. Banning cell phones in my district is merely a denial of the changing times we must adapt to. Again, that's looking pretty good too, but let's break it down bit by bit. So answer the essential question. You get awarded the head. That's the thesis. Context and background. You need 3 sentences. And again, remember the do nots that do not include any mention of the sources, no quotes, no paraphrases. Minimum of 2 tier 2 level words gets you the mouth. Variety of sentence structures, hair, grammar, punctuation, and syntax. If that's perfect, you can accessorize. So you can see here in the beginning, that first sentence, basically speaks of the thesis. It's hammered home at the end. So it's kind of like a double whammy thesis, and that's totally okay. Sentence constructs are really nice. I like this third sentence with the double dash. And again, that's the benefit of running a nuance academy. Kids will know how to do that if you teach them and model how to do it. And I have hundreds of mentor sentences that I can lend you if you want to practice this. So in my YouTube channel, I have my ViewMaster exercises and some gamification for grammar, punctuation, and syntax. So just dabble in there and take a look around. So I have that one Spingo, which is like a modified bingo game, and then the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse game as well. That's what I currently have in there, which is pretty cool. Vocab is up. I like this Stone Age abacus, right? A little bit of flip to match the flip of Crowder. Very cool. I like the language there. It's kind of spicy, right? And in terms of getting the sophistication point, I like it when students can cop that kind of attitude and defend themselves and argue from that position, toe to toe with an extremely intelligent man who tends to lean on sarcasm and irony a little bit. So match wit for wit. So this one definitely is getting awarded everything. Out of the gate, they have a very solid foundation to write the rest of the essay. All right, I got one more for you. So let's do this one more time and break down declarative, inverted, and then all the rest of the components. So let's see this here. Again, write the letter, first, last, tier 2 sentence constructs. Hi, Stephen. You dropped a truth bomb that I can wholeheartedly concur with. That sounds like a thesis statement. You've answered the essential question. Not only are cell phones waylaying kids from receiving a high-quality education, but they are directly responsible for the sheer stupidity that is so prevalent in our modern culture. Apart from being an obnoxious nuisance, cell phones serve no greater purpose other than to preclude kids from learning. Once and for all, let's ban them at the door. Right? So sometimes my kids are double whammy in the thesis, and that's totally cool. It doesn't matter. So you could say that this is inverted and that first sentence is just context and background. But you can see the vocab is up. Nice words: preclude, prevalent, waylay. Very nice vocab in here. The sentence constructs are all varied. There's nothing running parallel. There's no dot rhythm going on. So all very nice. The grammar, the punctuation, the syntax, exactly as it should be and flawless. All right. For those of you that are painting with me, you might want to pause the video here and have your students work on their introductions. I'm a huge proponent of this. The more writing a student sees, the better they become. So share student writing. Take a look at the good, the bad, the ugly. Workshop these. Have students volunteer to have their work peer edited, whole class. Teacher, get to the easel, get to the canvas, and paint a few with your students so that it's completely demystified. All right. Our next question, because we're done with the intro. So, how do I write the how do I write the body paragraphs? And we're going to construct the rest of the Lego man syllogistically. So let me break down what that means. And I'll give you a quick flyby through this because I have a lot of stuff in my YouTube channel where I do deep dives into this. So suffice to say, the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle invented it at his school called the Lyceum, and the town boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they'd often throw out these juicy questions, and you see them in the Aristotelian text, like the seminal Aristotelian text, like Plato's Republic. What is justice? And the scholars and the philosophers would step to the proverbial mic, and they would drop their definition of what justice is, and Aristotle said, why is it that some of my students are exceptional at this? Some are men, some tank bomb. And he got it. He said, my students are really good at this because they can argue mathematically, computatively, and have like a certain precision to their execution. And the really good orators go premise, premise, conclusion, like a math formula. So if I were to say to you, premise 1, arsenic is deadly, you would say, yup, Christian, I agree. But if I say premise 2, my dog ate arsenic, we naturally, either we induce or deduce that my dog is going to die. Uh-oh, that's an ill-fated dog right there. That's not good, Christian. And what happens in synthesis is that oftentimes students only present the second premise. And that's why they just so doggedly stick to the source material, and they paraphrase and overquote and lose the centrality of their argument. So let's take that syllogistic method and turn it into a template for the purposes of synthesis. So all of this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. That's what a syllogistic body paragraph is. 10 to 12 sentences. Those little 4 or 5 sentence baggers that students often write, there's just not enough in there to really advance and flesh out an argument. There's not enough support, not enough analysis. So the first 3 sentences are going to keep the centrality of the argument, and the student is going to argue a why reason, right? Again, no paraphrasing, no quoting, no piggybacking, centrality of student argument. 3 sentences, why reason. I'll model that 3 times for you. Second premise is going to be the textual support, and this is where we want to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. We don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. And then here's the kicker. Syllogistic body paragraphs need conclusions, just like you need a conclusion on the. So I'll model this for you a few times. All right, so let's take a look at how to build the torso of the Lego man. So the torso is going to be the why reason. Okay, the first premise is going to be the why reason. So this can be kind of confusing for students. So let's ask ourselves this question. How do I write the first premise? And this is the importance of Bob Rossing your instruction. To keep it simple, I have a few sentence stems that students can steal from me if they get stuck. So the first premise can begin, there is a clear reason as to why. So you can see there, the student therefore will state the why reason. If they have multiple reasons, they can say, there are a couple of reasons why the school board should, right? And then go from there. So let's flesh that all out. Let me use those stems and show you how to do the full 3 sentences. So again, 3 sentences, why reason. There are a multitude of reasons as to why my school must heed your advice. First, hosting discussions like Socratic seminars and fishbowls, which are long-standing pedagogical modalities, just aren't possible because the cell phone has diluted my generation's socialization skills. And secondly, the research is clear. Kids today just quite simply are not academically performing at the rates of their global counterparts. So let's break this down. I call this one the enumerated approach. Notice that I say first and second. So the first premise is a promise, and therefore I would need to have quotes and or paraphrases for the first. So the first is talking about how kids don't socialize like they used to because of the cell phone, and that Socratic seminars and classroom discussions just are hard to have because of the cell phone. Kids don't have that skill anymore. And then second is tying to the fact that we are not performing like our other counterparts in the world. So the American students aren't doing as well. All right, that might be a little confusing. So let's see that one more time. Let's see the centrality of the argument, the why reason of the first premise. So this is student number 2. Like most of Crowder's inane rants that are intended to rile the ire of the myopic citizenry, his current bus loop antics are no exception. As a district, I'm hoping that you see the tremendous transformational power of these mere devices in terms of revolutionizing how students learn best. What we need to do is figure out ways to befriend cell phones, not demonize them as the sole cause of all of our educational woes. Again, when my students write their first premises, I always say, put it in the language of a promise, because when they do that, they can therefore keep the line of reasoning intact. And we'll look at that in just a second. So just to recap, first premise, 3 sentences, argue the why reason. If students do that satisfactorily, they are awarded the torso. So one of the things I do after I'm done writing the first premise, if I'm to be honest and open up the lid of my brain, I go quote hunting. I go paraphrase hunting. So I get into my sources and I'm like, all right, what's the promise of my first premise? And how do I keep all of my quotes, all of my paraphrases germane to the promise of the first premise? All right. And that's the kicker. To keep the line of reasoning intact, you have to keep the promise of the first premise. All right. So let's construct the whole rest of the Lego man. First things first, if a student has not written 10 to 12 sentences, they do not have a man, right? So this has to be 10 to 12 sentences. A little under is fine, a little over is fine, right? The key is to keep the line of reasoning intact. So the head is done, right? And we've got the eyes, the mouth. We've accessorized with our declarative inverted thesis. Here's the kicker. The torso is the first premise, but those arms are going to be the things that hug the person, right? The promise of the first premise. Quotes and paraphrases are germane. So we're going to give ourselves a big hug when the quotes are totally aligned to the promise of the first premise. Spiffy attire is going to be tier 2 and the sentence constructs. And then the legs are going to be the 2 to 3 sentence conclusion of the body paragraph, where we make our links and link it all back to the prompt and to the thesis statement. So let's take a look at a whole syllogistic body paragraph. So we'll start again with the torso, the first 3 sentences. There are a multitude of reasons as to why my school must heed your advice. First, hosting discussions like Socratic seminars and fishbowls, which are long-standing pedagogical modalities, just aren't possible because the cell phone has diluted my generation's socialization skills, right? So we need quotes and or paraphrases about classroom discussions being rendered not as good because of the cell phones and the lack of socialization skills. So we're going to start with that. So we need stuff about socialization and its connection to cell phones. And this is enumerated. And secondly, the research is clear. Kids today just quite simply are not academically performing at the rate of their global counterparts. So we need evidence for that. So 4th sentence begins the second premise. Let's see what this student did. I tell my students in the 4th sentence, get quoting, get paraphrasing, because you've laid the centrality of your argument. So start piggybacking some of the sources to build your ethos. Steve Collison, the director of the School of Education at Columbia University and a foremost expert on classroom discussion modalities, asserts that today's students lack the requisite socialization skills to fully participate in civic discourse, which is the direct result of their unwitting addiction to a mere screen. Do you see how that quote ties to the first in the first premise as we enumerated? We promised you a discussion about classroom discussion. So that quote right there is perfect. But now we gotta unpack it a little bit, right? You just can't quote dump. You gotta unpack it. Unlike previous generations, kids in my school spend most of their time isolating with the device. As such, the necessary discourse skills required to fully participate in a classroom discussion are largely absent. Another quote from Collison. So we quoted twice from Collison. It's especially true of my school and countless other districts. Take, for example, Phillips Exeter Academy, the birthplace of the Harkness discussion. Their headmaster notes that the cell phone was a major impediment to the purpose, structure, and impetus of this long-established modality. So we got 2 sources. We know we needed a minimum of 3. We got 2 right now. Given this, the school banned cell phones and the positive impact was immediate. Another interesting statistic to see is where American high school scholars rank to their global counterparts. All right, now this was the second promise, right, in the enumerated scheme. Perhaps at no surprise, the United States ranks 32nd in the STEM fields and 28th in the arts and humanities, source C. But here's the thing. All the countries in the top 5 have one thing in common. They banned cell phones years ago. All right, we're cooking in peanut oil. So we have enough support, we have enough analysis We're really doing well, and we're coming upon our 10 to 12 sentences. But we need to add the legs, right? We need to add a conclusion to this. You just can't end on a quote and abandon the syllogism. You got to wrap it all up. So this takes a couple of sentences. Look what this student did. So my students typically go back to the prompt on this, and they go back to the thesis. So look at this. Meet the demand of the assignment. Link it all back. Our district really needs to reconsider its policies for the well-being of all involved. Your chief concern should be about learning, since, after all, this is a school. Do what's right and ban them already. So you can see, hammer the thesis, go back to the prompt. So our intro's done, our first body is done, but we got to ask ourselves the question, what do I do next? Guess what? It's really easy. You're going to bust out another syllogism, and I made this a 4-paragraph essay. My students on the FRQs for Lang and Lit only write 4 paragraphs because they're writing syllogistic bodies, and if students are avoiding those 4 or 5 sentence baggers, there's no need to have 3 body paragraphs. 4 is totally sufficient. So we're going to bust out another syllogism. We're going to have 3 sentence first premise. We're going to have our quotes, paraphrases, teeter-tottered, and we're going to wrap it up. And we're going to build that Lego man. So let's play it again. Let's take it from the top. First premise. Since we already used that stem, we're not going to use it again. Like most of Crowder's inane rants that are intended to rile the ire of the myopic citizenry, his current bus loop antics are no exception. As a district, I'm hoping that you see the tremendous transformational power of these mere devices in terms of revolutionizing how students learn best. What we need to do is figure out ways to befriend cell phones, not demonize them as the sole cause of all of our educational woes. All right, so we're going to go quote hunting. We have to find all the positives of the cell phone, right? That's our promise here. If we're going to stay germane, we're going to keep our line of reasoning. We need to find all the positives. Again, just like the first time, the second premise begins at the 4th sentence. Get quoting, get paraphrasing. So here it is. Several elite colleges and universities in the country, notably MIT and Stanford, have instituted cell phone etiquette curriculum into their requisite freshman studies program. According to Gene Buttons, the inclusion of such content sets clear parameters for appropriate cell phone usage within educational settings, but the syllabus is clear in delineating the multitude of ways these devices can help students transcend their studies. Source B. So you can see there immediately that quote is absolutely connected to the promise of the first premise. So we got arms, we're able to connect this. The Lego man's coming together. That hugs the first premise. It's not an all or nothing proposition. With proper counsel, kids in our school can use these devices to actually do a lot of good. At present, several districts in the country are using an innovative New York Times app that transformed its classic Wordle game into an edutainment opportunity for kids to interact with each other, to learn vocabulary and the basics of grammar, punctuation, and syntax. One student put it simply, this app takes skill sets that are typically very boring and makes them a whole lot of fun. Source D. And again, that quote pertains and it ties to the first quote, right? So the quotes want to be talking to each other. They want to be in conversation. Let's be real. The traditional ways of doing grammar workbooks doesn't go very far with my generation of kids. There's old pedagogy and new pedagogy, and the new ways find creative solutions to take advantage of all the wonderful things cell phones can do. But further, my generation learns differently as a result of these devices. Now more than ever, teachers are struggling mightily to engage what seems to be a very disengaged youth. All right, very cool. So we got 3 quotes in there, and that's typically what I do. When I Bob Ross, I usually go 3 quotes in a syllogistic body paragraph, keep it all tied, but we still have to add those legs. So let's go all the way back to the prompt and the thesis here. It is true. We are pleading with our teachers and even you to engage us so that we can make the most of this educational experience. Please find ways to make the most of cell phones instead of banning the one thing that can totally transform how and what kids learn. And again, 10 to 12 sentences there. All right, if you're painting with me, pause here. Have students work on the first premises, go quote hunting, and make sure everything is staying aligned in terms of the line of reasoning. Keep the promise of the first premise. Make sure you add those legs onto the syllogistic Lego man. All right, we got to wrap this all up here. We need a conclusion paragraph, right? Because we have intro, two bodies, and now we need a conclusion. One of the things I do is I have in my classroom a poster with 15 sentence stems to wrap up an essay. One such stem is this. It's very, very easy. Simply said, comma. My students usually end with a big thematic fireworks crescendo at the end where they hammer theme, hammer prompt, hammer thesis, and it only takes 3 to 4 sentences. So look at how this student used a very easy sentence stem, simply said, and then they go all back to the prompt and the thesis. So look at this. Simply said, it is quite clear that contemporary educational settings need to get with the changing times and embrace technological advancements more fully. Turning a blind eye isn't working. To fulfill their primary purpose, which is to prepare students for what's next in life, schools must adapt and learn how to integrate these devices into meaningful instruction. And voila, that is your whole essay. So in terms of the Lego man, if the grammar is correct and the punctuation is all looking good and you got those syntactical flares going on, by all means, allow that kid to accessorize that Lego man. All right, here's one super cool thing. If you're using my Lego man template, guess what? You can ditch traditional grading methods. So in the ELA circuit, one thing that I'm known for are my alternative grading methods. I ditched the traditional grading paradigm years ago. I don't take work home. I think traditional grading is for the birds. Like, it compels us to compulsory unpaid overtime. And the fact of the matter is, that no matter how many comments we squeeze into the margins of a student's draft, they're not going to grow and mature regardless of our efforts. So I don't do it. I don't do traditional grading. You can do a very cool peer edit with this, and I'll tell you what I did with my students. So my students printed out their essays, came to class, and I equipped each kid with a box of crayons and a sheet of paper. Now, students would give their essays to a peer, and the peer would read the essay and draw the Lego man with crayons on that white sheet of paper. But there would be conversations that would ensue. Let's say, for example, that students did not incorporate the 5-word rule as far as quoting goes, and they were doing quote dumps. Then they would say, all right, then you can't, give your Lego man the shirt. You can't give him the tie because your quote transitions are lousy. Or the student says, hey, wait a minute, you never answered the essential question in this thesis here. Like, you're quoting, you're paraphrasing in the intro. You don't even get ahead. You got to do this over. And the author's like, oh, let me look at this. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got to revise. So the other thing you can do is, instead of putting comments in students' margins, you yourself, if you want control over the writing process, can draw the Lego man for your students. And if they're missing some part of the Lego man, they have to meet up with a peer and find out, why am I missing hair? Why am I missing eyes? Why am I missing arms on my Lego man? And kind of revise that way. All right, we're coming to the end here. So let me sign off by saying happy teaching and happy writing. But let me give you my email address and links to my website in case you need to contact me. So teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com is my email if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to drop me a line. Note that I am a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, and we offer professional development all calendar year long. And if you want to learn more about those PD offerings, check out my webpage. Up in the banner, there's a link that says My NWP Courses. Click on that and you'll see the drop-down menu. So teachinghowtowrite.com. We have all sorts of really good PD. It's very affordable. I think that for a nominal fee, NWP offers some killer professional development. And I know in comparison to a lot of other PD offerings, NWP is perhaps the most affordable, but you also get awarded your credit hours for certification reasons. So they always have badges that they award for PDs. So check that out, teachinghowtowrite.com. All right, we're at the end. So hope all is well. Hope this is useful and that we can tackle this conundrum of cell phone use in our classroom. Take care.